There are places that change when you see them from above. Streets become patterns. Buildings become shapes. And what once seemed like a busy town suddenly becomes part of something much larger. High above Hua Hin, the sounds of the city begin to fade. The roads below grow smaller. The coastline stretches toward the horizon, following the gentle curve of the Gulf of Thailand. Beyond the buildings, the sea catches the morning light, while forests and hills disappear into the distance. From here, Hua Hin looks different. The beaches we followed along the coast are no longer separate destinations. They become part of one continuous landscape, a narrow meeting point between mountains, forest, city, and sea. But this mountain has been here long before the hotels, roads, and modern town below it. Long before visitors came to watch the sunrise. Long before Hua Hin became a destination. Khao Hin Lek Fai has been watching. Watching the seasons change. Watching fishermen return from the sea. Watching a small coastal settlement slowly grow into the Hua Hin we know today. And perhaps that is what makes a mountain different from a viewpoint. A viewpoint allows us to see a place. A mountain allows us to see its story. Just a short distance from the center of Hua Hin, the landscape rises above the town. Known locally as Khao Hin Lek Fai, this mountain has become one of the most recognizable landmarks surrounding Hua Hin. Its name is often translated as the Flint Mountain, a reference to the rocky landscape found here. At around 300 meters above sea level, the mountain is not particularly high by Thai standards. But its position gives it something far more important than height. Perspective. From its slopes, the entire shape of Hua Hin begins to reveal itself. The town stretches toward the Gulf of Thailand, its coastline forming a long curve along the sea. Roads connect neighborhoods that, from the ground, can feel completely separate. Hotels and apartment buildings rise among older houses, while beyond the developed areas, green hills and forests continue toward the horizon. From here, the relationship between Hua Hin and the landscape becomes much easier to understand. The town did not simply appear beside the sea. It grew because of it. The coastline provided food and transportation. The surrounding hills offered shelter and a natural landmark for those approaching from the sea. And over time, this combination of ocean, flat coastal land, and mountains helped shape the character of the settlement. Today, millions of people know Hua Hin as a beach destination. But from the mountain, another Hua Hin becomes visible. The fisherman's town. The railway town. The royal seaside retreat. And the modern resort city that has grown around all of them. Every layer remains visible if you know where to look. Perhaps this is why Khao Hin Lek Fai has become more than simply a place to enjoy a panoramic view. For visitors, it offers one of the clearest perspectives over Hua Hin. For photographers, the changing light can transform the entire coastline within minutes. For residents, the mountain is a familiar presence, something that helps define the shape of the town they call home. And for wildlife, the forested slopes provide a very different world from the busy streets below. As we climb higher, the sounds of traffic gradually give way to wind moving through the trees. The city does not disappear. It simply becomes quieter. From here, we can begin to see something that is difficult to understand while walking through the streets below. Hua Hin is not just a town beside the sea. It is a town shaped by the relationship between the sea, the mountains, and the people living between them. And Khao Hin Lek Fai stands directly in the middle of that relationship. Sometimes, to understand a place, we have to step away from it. And sometimes, the best way to see where we are is to climb above it. From the ground, Hua Hin can feel like a collection of separate places. A beach here. A market there. A busy road connecting one neighborhood to another. Hotels rise behind the coastline. Small houses sit beside modern buildings. Fishing boats rest near the shore, while traffic moves through streets that have become increasingly busy over the years. But from Khao Hin Lek Fai, those divisions begin to disappear. The town becomes one landscape. Standing high above Hua Hin, the coastline stretches away in both directions. The Gulf of Thailand opens toward the horizon, while the town occupies the narrow strip of land between the sea and the hills. It is a perspective that reveals something easy to miss from street level. Hua Hin is a town shaped by geography. The sea defines its eastern edge. The mountains and hills create a natural boundary to the west. And between them lies the city, growing, changing, and constantly adapting to the landscape around it. Look toward the coast and the history of Hua Hin becomes easier to imagine. Long before high-rise hotels and modern resorts appeared, this shoreline supported fishing communities whose lives depended on the sea. Later, the arrival of the railway connected Hua Hin with Bangkok and opened the coast to a completely different kind of visitor. Royal interest followed. Tourism followed. And eventually, the modern city followed. From the mountain, these different chapters seem to exist at the same time. The old and the new. The local and the international. The natural landscape and the city built upon it. Below us, roads continue toward the coast. Beyond them, the beaches disappear into the distance. And beyond the beaches lies the Gulf, an immense body of water that has connected communities across this region for centuries. The view also reveals how quickly Hua Hin has changed. Buildings that seemed enormous from the ground become small shapes from above. Roads that once marked the edge of town now disappear into expanding neighborhoods. Empty spaces become construction sites, and construction sites eventually become part of the city. Change is easier to see from a distance. Perhaps because when we stand inside a place, we experience only the present. From above, we can see the layers. We can see what was there before. We can see what exists now. And sometimes, we can begin to imagine what might come next. This is one of the quiet powers of mountains. They do not simply give us a better view. They give us distance. And distance changes perspective. When we are close to something, we see its details. When we step back, we begin to see its shape. Hua Hin is no exception. From the streets below, it is easy to become part of the movement, the traffic, the buildings, the crowds, the sounds of everyday life. From here, everything slows down. The city continues moving beneath us. But from the mountain, we can simply watch. And perhaps that is why this view feels so different. It does not show us a new Hua Hin. It shows us the Hua Hin that was always there. From Khao Hin Lek Fai, there is no single view of Hua Hin. The mountain reveals the town from different directions, and each viewpoint tells a slightly different story. One moment, the Gulf of Thailand fills the horizon. Turn another way, and the landscape changes completely. The city disappears behind trees, and the hills stretch toward the interior of Prachuap Khiri Khan. It is one of the reasons this mountain is worth exploring rather than simply visiting one viewpoint and leaving. Every direction reveals another side of Hua Hin. The view toward the sea. The most obvious view is also the most spectacular. Looking east, Hua Hin spreads out below the mountain before gradually disappearing into the Gulf of Thailand. On a clear day, the coastline seems almost endless. The beaches we explored in our previous journey become part of one continuous line, from the center of Hua Hin toward Khao Takiab and beyond. From this height, the relationship between the town and the sea becomes unmistakable. The view toward the mountains. Turn away from the sea, however, and Hua Hin almost disappears. The landscape becomes greener. Hills replace buildings. Roads become smaller and eventually disappear between forests and valleys. This is the side of Hua Hin that many beach visitors never see. The resort town is only one part of a much larger landscape. Beyond it lies a quieter world of forests, farms, villages, and mountains stretching toward the interior. Standing here, it becomes difficult to imagine that one of Thailand's best-known seaside destinations is only a few kilometers away. The city below. Looking back toward the town, another story emerges. From above, the scale of Hua Hin becomes easier to understand. Roads form patterns through the city. Hotels and apartment buildings rise among older neighborhoods. Small houses sit beside modern developments. And somewhere below, people continue with the ordinary routines of everyday life. From this distance, the details disappear. What remains is the shape of the city itself. And perhaps that is one of the most fascinating things about looking at a familiar place from somewhere unfamiliar. The closer we are to a place, the more we notice what separates it. The farther we step back, the more we see what connects it. The changing view. But even the same viewpoint never remains the same for long. Morning light can make the coastline appear soft and almost dreamlike. By midday, the colors become sharper, and the details of the city stand out beneath the tropical sun. In the late afternoon, shadows begin to stretch across the landscape. And as the sun approaches the horizon, Hua Hin slowly changes once again. The buildings lose their hard edges. The sea becomes a sheet of reflected light. And the mountain itself becomes part of the silhouette. The view has not changed. Only the light has. Yet somehow, the entire landscape feels different. Perhaps this is another lesson mountains teach us. A place can remain exactly where it is, while our experience of it changes completely. And then, something moves between the trees. At first, it is easy to miss. A rustle in the leaves. A shadow crossing the rocks. Then another. And suddenly, the mountain reveals one of its most famous inhabitants. Monkeys. For visitors to Khao Hin Lek Fai, encountering them can feel almost inevitable. They have become part of the mountain's identity, living among the trees and rocky slopes only a short distance from the streets of Hua Hin. But these animals are more than a tourist attraction. They are wild animals living in a landscape that has changed dramatically around them. The forested slopes provide shelter, places to rest, and access to food. The surrounding vegetation supports insects, fruits, leaves, and other natural resources, while the rocky terrain offers places where the animals can move and observe their surroundings. But the mountain is no longer an isolated piece of wilderness. Hua Hin has grown around it. Roads approach its slopes. Buildings have spread across the surrounding landscape. Thousands of people visit the area every year. And the monkeys have learned to live alongside them. This relationship can be fascinating to watch. A monkey may sit quietly on a wall while people pass nearby. Another may move through the trees as if the visitors below do not exist. Young animals play among the rocks while older members of the group remain watchful. Their behavior reminds us that wild animals do not necessarily disappear when cities expand. Sometimes, they adapt. But adaptation comes with risks. Animals that become accustomed to human food can lose some of their natural foraging behavior. Feeding wildlife may seem harmless, especially when a monkey approaches and appears comfortable around people, but human food can create unhealthy habits and increase conflict between animals and visitors. The safest relationship is therefore not to turn these animals into pets. It is to give them space. Watch them. Photograph them. But allow them to remain wild. There is something strangely humbling about standing only a few meters away from an animal that does not belong to us. It has its own social structure, its own territory, its own way of understanding the mountain. We are simply visitors passing through. And perhaps that is the most interesting thing about encountering wildlife in a place like Khao Hin Lek Fai. The mountain does not belong entirely to the people looking out over Hua Hin. It belongs to countless other creatures as well. Birds move through the canopy. Insects live beneath the leaves. Lizards disappear between the rocks. And monkeys move through the forest as they have done long before today's visitors arrived. We often think of cities as places where nature ends. But sometimes, nature simply learns where we have built our homes. The monkeys of Khao Hin Lek Fai are a reminder of that delicate coexistence. They are close enough for us to see, wild enough to remain unpredictable. And perhaps most importantly, they remind us that even in a changing city, there are still places where the rules of the human world do not completely apply. The monkeys may be the most visible inhabitants of Khao Hin Lek Fai. But they are only one part of a much larger world. Beyond the viewpoints and the roads, the mountain continues into a landscape of trees, rocks, insects, birds, and countless smaller forms of life that most visitors will never notice. From a distance, the forest can appear quiet. Up close, it is anything but. Leaves move in the wind. Insects disappear beneath the undergrowth. Birds call from somewhere high in the canopy. Lizards warm themselves on sunlit rocks before vanishing into the vegetation. Every part of the mountain is connected. Trees provide shelter and food. Insects pollinate plants and become food for birds and reptiles. Fallen leaves return nutrients to the soil. And the rocks themselves create small habitats where life can survive even during the hottest months. It is easy to overlook these details when the main attraction is the view. But the further we look, the more complicated the mountain becomes. What appears to be a simple forest is actually a network of relationships that has developed over generations. The mountain also creates its own rhythm. Early in the morning, when temperatures are lower, birds become more active. As the sun climbs higher, many animals retreat into shade. Later in the afternoon, activity begins to increase again as the heat loses its intensity. The landscape changes with the light. And so does the life within it. Even the wind plays a role. Moving through the trees, it carries seeds, pollen, scents, and moisture from one part of the mountain to another. Rainwater follows the contours of the slopes, finding its way through soil and rock before continuing toward the lower landscape. What happens on the mountain does not remain on the mountain. The forest is connected to everything below it. And that connection becomes particularly important in a place like Hua Hin, where natural landscapes exist directly beside a growing urban environment. The mountain provides more than a home for wildlife. It offers shade. It stores water. It helps regulate the local environment. and it preserves a small piece of the natural landscape that existed here long before the modern city. Standing among the trees, the sounds of Hua Hin can sometimes still be heard in the distance. A motorcycle passes somewhere below. A vehicle moves along a road. The faint sounds of the city rise through the trees. Yet here, the rhythm is different. Slower. Less predictable. More ancient. A city measures time in minutes, hours, and years. A mountain measures it in seasons, generations, and stone. Perhaps that is why places like Khao Hin Lek Fai feel so different from the streets below. They remind us that our way of measuring time is only one way of experiencing the world. The trees do not know how many tourists visited today. The birds do not know how quickly Hua Hin is developing. The rocks do not notice another building appearing on the horizon. They simply remain part of a much older rhythm. And for a few moments, standing quietly among them, we can become part of it too. Before the hotels, before the railway, before Hua Hin became one of Thailand's best-known seaside destinations, there was simply the landscape. The sea. The forest. The hills. And among them, Khao Hin Lek Fai. To understand the mountain today, it helps to understand the town that grew beneath it. Hua Hin's story began long before modern tourism. For generations, the coastline was home to fishing communities whose lives were closely connected to the Gulf of Thailand. The sea provided food. The shoreline provided a place to live and work. And the hills inland formed a natural backdrop to the settlement. At that time, the mountain was not a viewpoint. There were no observation platforms. No visitors arriving to photograph the coastline. No city stretching toward the horizon below. The mountain was simply part of everyday life. Then, in the early 20th century, something changed. The railway arrived. The connection between Bangkok and the coast transformed Hua Hin. What had once been a relatively remote coastal settlement became much easier to reach. And with better access came new possibilities. Hua Hin began to attract visitors from Bangkok, including members of Thailand's royal family. The seaside environment, cooler air, and distance from the capital made the area increasingly attractive as a place for retreat. Royal residences were established here, and Hua Hin gradually developed a reputation as a royal seaside destination. Tourism followed. Hotels appeared. Roads expanded. The small coastal settlement slowly became the town we recognize today. And through all of these changes, Khao Hin Lek Fai remained above it. The mountain did not build the railway. It did not construct the hotels. It did not decide where the roads would go. But it witnessed every stage of the transformation. This is one of the strange things about landscapes. Human history can move incredibly quickly. A railway can transform a town within a generation. A new road can change an entire neighborhood. A hotel can appear where there was once nothing but open land. But the mountain remains. Its rocks do not remember the names of the people who climbed them. Its trees do not record the dates when buildings appeared below. Yet the landscape itself becomes a kind of silent archive. Stand here today and look toward the coast. The modern city is visible everywhere. But beneath it are older layers. The fishing communities. The railway. The royal connection. The early visitors. And the gradual transformation into a modern destination. A town can change within a lifetime. A landscape can carry the memory of centuries. Perhaps this is why standing on Khao Hin Lek Fai feels strangely different from standing in the city below. Down there, history is hidden inside buildings, streets, photographs, and archives. Up here, history is written differently. It is written in the shape of the land, in the coastline, in the mountains, in the trees that continue to grow where generations before us once walked. And perhaps that is what mountains remember. Not individual names, not individual moments, but change itself. Mountains remember what people forget. After seeing the mountain up close, it is time to look once again toward the town below. From this height, Hua Hin appears almost peaceful. The traffic is still moving. People are still walking through the streets. Hotels continue to welcome their guests. Fishermen prepare their boats along the coast. And somewhere below, everyday life continues exactly as it always does. But from here, the details become smaller. The noise becomes quieter. And the landscape begins to tell a different story. Hua Hin stretches along a narrow strip between two very different worlds. To the east, the Gulf of Thailand. To the west, the hills and forests of the interior. And between them, the town has grown. At first, it may look like a simple coastal city. But look closer. The beaches connect one part of the coastline to another. Roads follow the shape of the land. Older neighborhoods sit beside modern developments. Hotels rise behind beaches that were once used primarily by fishing communities. And the railway that helped open Hua Hin to the outside world continues to connect the town with the rest of Thailand. Everything is connected. The sea influenced the fishermen. The railway changed the town. Royal visitors helped shape its identity. Tourism transformed its economy. And the mountain remained quietly above it all. From the ground, these things can feel separate. A railway station is a railway station. A fishing boat is a fishing boat. A hotel is simply a hotel. A beach is simply a beach. But from above, the connections become easier to see. This is not a collection of unrelated places. It is one landscape. One story. One town shaped by the relationship between people and the environment around them. And perhaps that is what makes the view from Khao Hin Lek Fai so powerful. It gives us distance without taking us away. We are still part of Hua Hin. We can still hear the city. We can still see the roads and buildings. But for a moment, we are far enough away to understand the bigger picture. Sometimes we need distance not to leave a place behind, but to understand where we belong within it. Look toward the sea and Hua Hin's past becomes visible. Look toward the city and its present is everywhere. Look toward the hills and its future feels uncertain. The landscape is changing. New buildings will appear. Roads will expand. More people will arrive. Some things that seem permanent today will eventually disappear. But the relationship between mountain and sea will remain. And perhaps that is the quiet lesson of Khao Hin Lek Fai. Cities belong to their time. Landscapes belong to something much longer. Standing above Hua Hin, we are given a rare opportunity. We can see the past beneath the present. We can see the present changing before our eyes. And we can imagine a future that has not yet arrived. For a moment, all three exist together. Below us, Hua Hin keeps moving. Above it, the mountain remains still. A mountain may appear permanent. Its rocks do not move. its slopes remain in the same place. And from a distance, it can seem almost unchanged. But spend a day on Khao Hin Lek Fai, and another side of the mountain begins to appear. Because while the mountain remains still, everything around it is constantly changing. The first hours of the morning are often the quietest. The air is cooler. The light is softer. Birds become active among the trees, and the landscape slowly emerges from the shadows of the night. Below, Hua Hin begins another day. Roads gradually fill with traffic. Shops prepare to open. Fishermen begin their work along the coast. And from the mountain, the town seems to wake up one part at a time. As the sun rises higher, the character of the mountain changes. Colors become stronger. Shadows become shorter. The heat begins to settle over the rocks and trees. At midday, the view can be incredibly clear, but the intensity of the tropical sun also changes the experience. Wildlife retreats into shade. People search for shelter from the heat. And the mountain becomes quieter again. It is a reminder that tropical landscapes have their own rhythm. Not everything is active all the time. Sometimes survival means knowing when to slow down. As afternoon approaches, the light begins to soften. The hard edges of the city become warmer. The sea reflects the changing sky. And once again, the mountain begins to feel alive with movement. Visitors arrive to watch the sunset. Birds cross the sky. The wind moves through the trees. Far below, Hua Hin prepares for another evening. Then comes the final transformation. The sun approaches the horizon. The coastline becomes a silhouette. Buildings lose their individual shapes and become part of one glowing landscape. The sea catches the last light of the day. And for a few minutes, the mountain seems to stand between two worlds. Behind us, the forest becomes dark. Ahead, the horizon still holds the last colors of the sun. Then the light disappears. The city below begins to glow. Streetlights replace sunlight. Windows illuminate buildings. The mountain becomes darker, quieter, and more mysterious. The day is over. But the landscape has not stopped changing. It has simply entered another rhythm. Nothing on this mountain is ever truly still. Even when the rocks do not move, the world around them is constantly becoming something new. Perhaps that is why returning to the same place can feel like visiting somewhere different. The mountain is the same. But the light is different. The weather is different. The sounds are different. And we are different too. We never really see the same place twice. When most people think of Hua Hin, they imagine the sea. Long beaches. Warm water. Palm trees. Resorts. Horses walking along the sand. Perhaps a quiet evening beside the coast. And there is nothing wrong with that picture. The sea is an important part of Hua Hin's identity. But it is only part of the story. From Khao Hin Lek Fai, another Hua Hin begins to appear. A Hua Hin that is greener. Quieter. More connected to the hills beyond the town. Here, the sound of the ocean is replaced by wind moving through trees. The horizon is no longer defined only by water. And the landscape reminds us that Hua Hin has always existed between different worlds. Between the mountains and the sea. Between a fishing community and a modern tourist destination. Between the quiet rhythm of local life and the constant movement of visitors. This contrast is part of what makes Hua Hin distinctive. Walk along the beach and the town can feel open and expansive. Drive through the center and it can feel busy and energetic. Climb the mountain and suddenly everything becomes quiet again. None of these experiences is more authentic than the others. They are simply different parts of the same place. And perhaps that is something travelers sometimes forget. We often search for the one place that represents a destination. The famous beach. The famous viewpoint. The famous market. The photograph everyone recognizes. But a place is rarely defined by one attraction. It is defined by everything that exists between them. The roads connecting one neighborhood to another. The fishermen returning from the sea. The trees growing on the hills. The people opening their shops in the morning. The families living beyond the areas tourists usually see. The animals moving through the forest. And the mountain standing quietly above it all. These are the details that create a sense of place. Hua Hin does not need to choose between being a resort town and being a local community. It can be both. It can be modern without completely losing its past. It can welcome visitors while still belonging to the people who live here. And it can continue to grow while parts of its natural landscape remain protected and alive. Of course, that balance is never guaranteed. As Hua Hin changes, questions about development, nature, traffic, tourism, and the future of the coastline become increasingly important. Every new building changes the landscape. Every new road changes how people move through it. Every new visitor becomes part of the story. And every generation has to decide what is worth keeping. Standing above the city, these questions feel different. They are no longer abstract ideas. They are visible in the landscape below. A destination is not only what we come to see. It is also what we choose to leave behind. Perhaps that is the side of Hua Hin that is easiest to miss. Not the beaches. Not the hotels. Not the viewpoints. But the responsibility that comes with having a place worth visiting. Because the future of Hua Hin will not be shaped by the mountain alone. It will be shaped by the people living beneath it. And by the visitors who choose how they experience it. The streets are still moving. Lights begin to appear across the city. Along the coast, the sea slowly disappears into the darkness. And above it all, Khao Hin Lek Fai remains. We came here for the view. But somewhere along the way, the view became something more. From this mountain, we saw Hua Hin from a different distance. We saw the coastline that shaped the town. The railway that connected it to the outside world. The fishermen who built their lives around the sea. The forests that still shelter life above the city. And the monkeys that remind us that this mountain is not ours alone. We saw how quickly a town can change. And how slowly a landscape changes in comparison. Roads appear. Buildings rise. People arrive. People leave. Generations pass. Yet the mountain remains. Perhaps that is why places like Khao Hin Lek Fai are worth more than a photograph. They give us a chance to step outside the movement of everyday life. To look at a place without immediately needing to go somewhere else. To notice what is usually overlooked. The wind moving through the trees. A bird crossing the evening sky. The distant sound of the city. The last light resting on the sea. These moments may seem insignificant. But perhaps places are remembered through moments like these. Not through everything we saw. But through what made us stop. And maybe this is what mountains teach us. They do not hurry. They do not follow the changing rhythm of the world below. They simply remain, watching, enduring, and becoming part of the landscape itself. Mountains remember what people forget. They remember that everything changes. And that nothing we build, no matter how permanent it may seem, exists forever. The city will continue to grow. The coastline will continue to change. New generations will walk these paths. And one day, they too may stand here and look down at Hua Hin from above. Perhaps they will see a very different city. But beneath their feet, the mountain will still be here. Quietly watching. As it always has.